Isabella sat alone in the small, dim motel room, her eyes flicking nervously to her watch. Victor was running late. She kept glancing at her phone, silently pleading for it to buzz with his name. But the room stayed eerily quiet, save for the low, droning hum of the air conditioner. Time felt like it was slipping through her fingers, and a gnawing anxiety churned in her stomach. She needed to get home soon. Leo would be waiting, and his questions were the last thing she wanted to face tonight. Finally, the silence shattered. Her phone vibrated, and she grabbed it in a heartbeat, expecting Victor's name to flash on the screen. Instead, her heart seemed to stop cold. The caller ID read Leo. Her thumb hesitated over the decline button, hovering like it weighed a ton. She knew ignoring him wasn't an option. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she answered, forcing her voice to sound light and casual. "Hey, honey. What's up?" she asked, her tone as breezy as she could manage. "Just checking in," Leo replied, his voice carrying its usual calm. "How are you? Where are you?" Isabella gave a strained laugh, hoping it didn't sound as forced as it felt. "Leo, I'm at the theater," she said smoothly. "I told you I was seeing a play with the girls from work. Why were you asking silly questions?" There was a pause on the other end. Then Leo spoke again, his tone still casual but laced with something darker. "Do they show plays at motels these days?" Her stomach flipped. A cold dread crawled up her spine as her hands began to tremble. "Oh, my God," she blurted out with a shaky laugh. "Honey, are you feeling okay?" "That's such a strange joke." He chuckled softly, but there was an edge to it. "Just messing with you, babe." It sounded awfully quiet for a theater, that's all. She swallowed hard, her mind spinning. Forcing out another laugh, she said, "I just stepped into the restroom, Leo. You're distracting me. Let's talk later, okay? I'll be home in a couple of hours." "Sure," he said, his tone lighter again. "I'll be waiting. Enjoy the play." The call ended, and Isabella's hand shook as she set the phone down. She exhaled shakily, trying to steady herself. Leo's casual joke had hit far too close to the truth. Just a coincidence, she muttered to herself. Just Leo being Leo. But the unease clung to her like a second skin. Before she could completely shake off the tension, a soft knock came at the door. She practically bolted to open it, relief washing over her as Victor stepped inside, slightly out of breath. His eyes darted down the hallway before he turned to her with a distracted smile. "You're late," she whispered, a small smile tugging at her lips despite her earlier anxiety. "Sorry about that," Victor murmured, his voice low. "Had some things to take care of." He didn't elaborate, but there was a certain urgency in his gaze that quieted her questions. He took her hands in his, pulling her close. They stood there for a moment, just studying each other in the dim light. Isabella's eyes roamed over his familiar features, his warm eyes, the faint stubble lining his jaw, and that confident, easy grin that made her pulse quicken. They spoke softly, swapping inside jokes and bits of small talk, their voices gradually dropping as the space between them shrank. Victor brushed a hand gently along her cheek, his touch lingering in a way that made her breath hitch. Her own hand rested on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of him through his shirt. The kiss was soft yet full of unspoken longing, pulling them deeper into their shared little world. Their laughter and whispers mingled, growing quieter as they savored the closeness they had long missed. Wrapped up in each other, the world outside the motel room faded away. Isabella rested against Victor, her breathing slowing as the calm. But when she glanced at her phone, the creeping weight of reality returned. She sighed, checking the time. Victor noticed and raised an eyebrow. "In a rush?" he teased, his voice playful but soft. Isabella offered a small smile, though a flicker of guilt crossed her face. I just need to get moving soon, she admitted. Leo's going to wonder where I am. Victor leaned back on the bed with a grin, closing his eyes as if envisioning the idea already forming in his head. We should just take off somewhere, he said. Go to the coast, sun, sand, just us. No Leo, no questions. Her eyes lit up, her voice tinged with excitement. That sounds perfect, she murmured. Maybe a quiet little beach town. We could disappear, even just for a few days. He opened his eyes, his smile widening. I like the way you think. They laughed softly, spinning fantasies of secret getaways and freedom. But their dreamlike moment shattered with a sudden, urgent knock at the door. Isabella stiffened instantly, her body tense as she whipped her head toward the sound. Victor sat up, his expression cautious as he reached for his boxers. Who could that be? Isabella whispered, clutching the sheet tighter around her and fumbling for her clothes. Victor flashed her his signature reassuring grin, though the tension in his jaw betrayed him. Relax, he said. No one knows we're here. I'll handle it. The knocking came again, louder this time, sending Isabella's pulse racing. Victor moved to the door, his voice calm but firm. All right, I'm coming. No need to pound like that. He glanced back at Isabella, offering her a small nod before he gripped the handle. Just as Victor began to open the door, a dreadful thought stabbed through Isabella's mind. What if it's Leo? She scrambled under the sheet and her heart thundered in her chest. But when Victor opened the door, relief flooded her. It wasn't Leo. Isabella's initial relief quickly twisted into bewilderment as she took in the woman standing at the door. Victor froze, his complexion draining to a ghostly pale. The woman's eyes locked on him, her face a storm of fury. It was Grace. For a tense moment, Grace said nothing. Her expression was icy, her rage simmering just below the surface. Then, without warning, she raised her purse and swung it with all the force of a sledgehammer, striking Victor squarely across the face. The blow sent him stumbling back as he threw his hands up in surrender. Grace, what the hell are you doing? Calm down. I can explain everything. Victor stammered, his voice shaky. Grace's voice exploded with venomous anger. Explain. You lying, cheating piece of garbage, she shouted, each word dripping with contempt. I knew you were up to something, but this? Even for you, this is a new low. Isabella, frozen in shock, finally found her voice. What is going on here? Who are you, and why are you barging in like this? If you don't leave, I'm calling the police. Grace spun on Isabella, her expression cold as ice. Shut your filthy mouth, you home-wrecking tramp, she spat. Anger flared in Isabella's chest. Who the hell do you think you are? Busting in here, throwing insults like some kind of lunatic. Victor raised his hands in a weak attempt to mediate. All right, let's all take a deep breath. I can explain everything. Oh, I'll tell her exactly who I am. Grace snapped, cutting him off. She turned back to Isabella, her eyes blazing. I'm this idiot's wife. He was supposed to be at work tonight, on a night shift, or so he said. Isabella's jaw dropped. Her stunned gaze flicked to Victor, disbelief written all over her face. Victor, you told me you were divorced. A month ago. You swore to me. Victor looked like a deer caught in headlights, glancing nervously between the two furious women. Isabella, I can explain, he stammered. Grace, please, let's talk about this outside. He reached out to guide Grace toward the door, but the moment his hand touched her arm, she wrenched away, her glare sharpening. Don't you dare touch me, you slimy liar, she hissed. Then, with a lightning-fast move, she brought her knee up hard, landing a devastating blow between Victor's legs. Victor crumpled instantly, gasping in pain as he doubled over. That'll teach you to keep those lying balls of yours in check, Grace sneered. As Victor groaned, clutching his stomach on the bed, Isabella couldn't hold back any longer. Are you out of your damn mind? She yelled, her voice a mix of anger and shock. You've lost it, lady. Grace turned on her with an icy smirk. Lost it? Oh, sweetheart, this isn't crazy. This is justice, she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Rolling her eyes, Isabella quickly pulled her dress over her head. You know what? I'm out of here. You two can sort out your psychotic drama without me. She turned toward the door, but Grace blocked her path with an outstretched arm, shoving her back forcefully. And where do you think you're going? Grace snapped. You don't get to crawl out of my husband's bed like this is some kind of slumber party. Isabella blinked, stunned for a second, but then her pride flared. She crossed her arms and met Grace's fiery glare head-on. Listen, you rabbit alley cat, lay another hand on me, and you'll regret it. Grace let out a mocking laugh, dark and low. Oh, really? What are you gonna do? Cry for mercy? Beg for forgiveness? Please. Victor groaned from the bed, still recovering from the assault. Grace, for God's sake, he croaked. Can we just talk like adults for a second? Grace ignored him, her anger zeroed in on Isabella. With a quick motion, she lunged forward and grabbed a fistful of Isabella's hair. Isabella let out a sharp yelp and retaliated immediately, grabbing Grace's hair in return. The two women twisted and grappled, looking more like feral cats in a back alley brawl than scorned lovers in a confrontation. You want to fight dirty? Isabella spat, yanking Grace's hair hard. Guess what, sweetheart? So can I. Victor, watching the chaos unfold, forced himself upright and staggered toward them. Ladies, stop. That's enough, he begged, reaching out to separate them. Bad idea. Isabella swung her arm, aiming for Grace, but her hand landed squarely on Victor's jaw. He stumbled back, clutching his face. Sorry. Isabella shouted, though her tone made it clear she wasn't that sorry. Grace, still clutching Isabella's hair, yanked with extra force, spinning Isabella around. Her hand shot out in a slap meant for Isabella, but it smacked Victor on the other side of his face instead. Can you two please stop beating on me? Victor cried out, staggering against the bedpost. His plea went unheard as the two women continued their wild battle, hair pulling and slaps flying with more enthusiasm than precision. You call that a slap? Isabella jeered, landing a hit on Grace's arm. You've got the strength of a soggy piece of bread. Oh, I'll show you strength. Grace snarled, swinging her purse. Victor tried one last time to step in, but as Isabella flung her elbow back, it connected with his stomach, and he collapsed onto the floor, wheezing. That's it, I'm done, he groaned, throwing his hands up in defeat. Good luck. Let me know when this is over. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of chaos, the two women pulled apart, both panting and glaring daggers at each other. The room was a disaster, sheets tangled, pillows on the floor, and Victor slumped against the wall looking like he'd been hit by a truck. Isabella huffed, straightening her dress and smoothing her hair. She glared at Grace one last time. You know what? Treat people like you just did, and it's no wonder he sneaks off. Isabella and Grace stood a few feet apart, both looking like they'd been churned through a blender set to high. Their clothes were disheveled, their hair stuck out in chaotic angles, and red slap marks adorned their faces like war paint. Despite their ragged appearances, the insults kept flying, each one sharper than the last. That dress? Really? Grace sneered, flicking a stray hair off her shoulder. I've seen more style on reality TV contestants. Isabella rolled her eyes, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, please. I'd take this over that leopard print catastrophe you're wearing." "What is that, a tribute to a zoo escapee?" Victor, still leaning against the wall and massaging his jaw, decided to take one last stab at peacemaking. "Okay, can we all just take a breath and talk like normal adults for a second?" "Big mistake." The women turned on him in perfect synchronization, each firing off insults so biting they'd make a drill sergeant blush. Victor slumped further, shoulders sagging under the weight of his poor decisions. He looked like a man who'd just realized he was at the bottom of a very steep, slippery mountain. Meanwhile, Isabella had managed to gather herself, smoothing her tattered dress and taking a steadying breath. She eyed the door, her resolve firming as she prepared to shove past Grace if needed. But before she could act, Grace reached into her purse, her expression venomous. "You want to play rough?" Grace hissed, pulling out a can of aerosol spray like a weapon. "Let's see how you like this." With that, she unleashed a powerful stream directly at Isabella's face. Isabella barely had time to shut her eyes before the thick, noxious mist enveloped her. She staggered back, coughing violently as the chemical stench clawed at her throat and filled her lungs. "What is this?" "Nail polish remover." Isabella sputtered, tears streaming from her burning eyes as she flailed to clear the air. The room now reeked like a disastrous science experiment, a blend of industrial fumes and bad decisions. Through the haze, she could make out Victor, who was coughing as he wrestled the can away from Grace. "Grace, stop it," he choked, struggling to pin her arms. "And don't, ouch. Don't bite me." Isabella, her head spinning and her senses muddled, saw her chance. Blinking through the stinging fumes, she stumbled toward the door, feeling along the wall for guidance. Victor's groans and Grace's shrieking faded into the background as she burst into the hallway, gulping in the blessedly fresh air. She didn't stop until she reached the outside, her lungs heaving as she coughed out the last of the fumes. "Never again," she muttered, clutching her chest as she blinked at the night sky. "That's the last time I ever let a guy talk me into a cheap motel meetup." Isabella hurried toward her car, but whatever relief she felt vanished the second she spotted the side of the vehicle. Bold, graffiti-style letters screamed back at her in stark black spray paint, "Cheater." Her jaw dropped as her fists clenched. "Perfect. Just perfect," she muttered bitterly, yanking open the car door and sliding into the driver's seat. She caught a glimpse of herself in the rearview mirror and froze. A streak of black paint ran down her cheek, standing out like a brand of shame. Realization hit her like a slap. Grace's spray wasn't just choking the room, it was now artfully smeared across her face. With an annoyed huff, Isabella grabbed a wet wipe and scrubbed at the mark, but all she succeeded in doing was spreading it further. "Great," she growled, tossing the useless wipe aside. "Guess I'll need paint thinner, or maybe a miracle, to fix this mess." Her reflection didn't improve her mood. Slap marks were blooming on her cheeks, her hair was a wild tangle, and her dress looked like it had lost a fight with a paper shredder. But none of it mattered. She needed to get out of there. "Forget it," she muttered, jamming the key into the ignition and starting the car. But as the engine rumbled to life, something felt off. The car wobbled unevenly, accompanied by a sickening thump-thump-thump. Isabella closed her eyes, exhaling slowly to keep from screaming. After a silent count to 3, she stepped out to investigate. Sure enough, one of her tires was completely flat, a jagged puncture glaring back at her like an insult. Isabella let out a frustrated growl, spitting on the ground. "Damn you, Grace," she muttered darkly. "You're going to pay for this. Just wait. I'll get home, clean up, and then it's round 2. The drive home was a simmering mess of emotions. Isabella barely noticed the road as anger, humiliation, and bitterness churned in her chest. Thoughts of Leo barely registered, She didn't care what he'd say about her shredded dress or the paint streaks on her face. No, her mind was locked on revenge. Grace wasn't getting away with this circus of a day. When she finally stormed into the house, she found Leo in the kitchen, casually sipping his coffee. He looked up at her, eyebrows raising, and then promptly burst into laughter. "Well, look at you," he managed between chuckles, flashing her a wide grin. "I can't decide if you're a raccoon or Zorro with that stripe." Isabella's jaw tightened as she rifled through the kitchen cabinets, her movements frantic. She had no idea what she was even looking for: soap, bleach, anything to scrub away the day. Leo leaned against the counter, arms crossed, thoroughly enjoying the show. "So, rough night at the theater?" he asked, his voice full of mock innocence. Isabella stammered, scrambling for an excuse. "You wouldn't believe it. These hooligans showed up after the show. Homeless, I think. They thought we were part of the performance and started going crazy with spray paint. Really. It was like some kind of avant-garde, immersive art piece." Leo raised an eyebrow, clearly amused as he struggled to keep a straight face. "Avant-garde, huh? That's definitely new for downtown theater." "Yeah," Isabella said, forcing a shaky laugh and ducking her head, still rummaging through drawers. "Very cutting-edge stuff." Leo wandered over to the window, casually sipping his coffee. His eyes landed on the massive word painted across the side of her car, and he nearly choked. Well, he said, barely stifling his laughter. "Looks like you gave the car a nickname. Don't you think it's a little rude?" Isabella froze, her face turning crimson. She spun around to glare at him, but his smirk only grew wider as he leaned in mockingly. "Seriously, Isabella," he said. "Should I be worried? You look like you've been through a war zone. Want some help?" "I don't have time for your jokes right now, Leo." Isabella snapped, her frustration boiling over as she grabbed a rag, then a sponge, then anything she could get her hands on. She muttered under her breath, her movements growing more frantic. Leo held up his hands in surrender, though his grin never wavered. He watched her pacing and fuming like a squirrel trapped in traffic. He had to admit, he'd expected some fallout, but this was far beyond his wildest imagination. "So, are you sure you were at the theater, honey?" he asked, his voice dripping with barely concealed amusement. Isabella whipped around, her patience teetering on the edge. "Of course I was, Leo. What kind of question is that?" Leo tilted his head, fighting back a laugh. "Well, looking at you, it seems more like you went 10 rounds with an alien." Isabella shot him a glare sharp enough to cut steel. "Hilarious, Leo. Really. With material like that, you should be on stage yourself." She yanked on a hoodie and sweatpants, the smear of black paint still glaring at her from the mirror. She muttered darkly, shoving her arms into the hoodie sleeves, "Now, where's the damn baseball bat?" Leo's eyebrows shot up. Whoa. Where are you headed, dressed like that? Joining a biker gang? Or maybe a vigilante squad?" Isabella didn't miss a beat. "Stop talking nonsense, Leo, and give me your car keys." That was when Leo decided it was time to end the charade. Watching her muttering about bats while smeared with paint was like witnessing a thunderstorm gathering strength. He stepped in front of her, his voice softening. "Isabella, take a breath. Let's just talk for a second." She glared at him, still bristling with anger. "I don't have time for this, Leo. I've got to teach that lying, two-timing snake a lesson." Leo crossed his arms, raising an eyebrow. "Maybe save the energy. You've got bigger problems." Her eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" His expression turned serious. "Victor has 2 girlfriends, Isabella. And I'm not even sure if you're number 1 or number 2. Isabella froze, her mouth opening in shock. Without thinking, she blurted, "Wait. He has someone else. That filthy, lying bastard." Her voice cracked with indignation. Leo's gaze bore into her silently, and the weight of her words finally hit her. Her face paled as she stammered, "Wait, what did I just say?" A humorless chuckle escaped Leo's lips. "Honey," he said evenly, "I know everything. Do you honestly think I didn't notice the changes?" Leo asked, his voice steady but laced with quiet anger. "The lies you kept spinning. The way you acted. All for him, Victor, a guy who's not only cheating on his wife but on you, and apparently on yet another woman too." Isabella's face fell, her anger melting into shock as the reality of his words hit her. Her eyes brimmed with tears. "Leo, I didn't mean for this to happen," she stammered. I got carried away. It was a mistake, a stupid mistake." Leo's tone didn't waver. "A mistake," he repeated. "Isabella, I know everything. Every meeting, every lie. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out? That I could just forgive this?" Her eyes widened, desperation creeping in. "Wait," she said, her voice trembling. "You've been following me. Watching me." Leo shrugged, crossing his arms. "Not every move," he admitted. "But enough. Because I'm not some clueless husband who's going to sit back while his wife sneaks around with another man and pretends everything's fine." Isabella stared at him, the pieces finally clicking together. "So, Grace showing up, that was you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Leo couldn't help but grin. "Well, let's just say that during my investigation of your little fling with Victor, there was an unfortunate leak of information." "These things happen," he said, mimicking her tone with a smirk. "And as you'd say, it was a mistake. I didn't mean for it to happen." Isabella threw her hands in the air, incredulous. "You caused this entire nightmare. You set me up." Unfazed, Leo met her outburst with calm. "Isabella, let me ask you something. I called you that night and asked where you were. And what did you say?" "That you were at the theater with your colleagues." His voice hardened. "So answer this, who set you up? Me, or you?" Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The trap he'd laid was airtight, and the weight of it left her speechless. Desperately, she tried a different approach, her tones shifting to pitiful. "You practically put me in mortal danger, Leo. I'm the victim here, caught up in this twisted game you decided to play." Leo's expression darkened, his voice dropping to a chilling calm. "We're not in a theater, Isabella," he said. "So drop the act." Her composure crumbled, tears streaming down her face as she let out a choked sob. It spiraled quickly into a full-blown tantrum, but Leo remained unmoved, his arms crossed, his patience worn thin. "I loved you, Isabella," he said quietly, the sadness in his voice cutting through the room. "I trusted you. But you made your choice. You traded me for that pathetic excuse of a man, Victor. Honestly, you should thank me for not being harsher. And believe me, I had plenty of options." Through her tears, Isabella screamed, "How could you do this? Leo, this is inhumane." Leo shook his head, his voice steady and unyielding. "Don't try to make this about me, Isabella. Tomorrow, the lawyer will be here with the divorce papers. Save whatever excuse you've got for court." His tone softened, but the finality in his words was unmistakable. "Just remember one thing, I didn't set you up. You walked into this mess all on your own." In the end, the chaos spilled into court, where the whole tangled mess unfolded like a dramatic soap opera. It wasn't just a divorce proceeding, it was an all-out showdown. Isabella and Grace went back and forth, slinging blame like confetti at a circus. After several rounds of accusations, the court ruled that Grace was responsible for the cost of repainting Isabella's car. As for Victor, he wasn't so lucky. Already reeling from the fallout, he was hit with the brunt of the expenses. By the time Grace was through with him, he was left with nothing, no house, no savings, no dignity. She made sure he walked out of court with little more than a parking ticket stub and a pat on the back from his lawyer. And Leo? He emerged unscathed. He walked away from the entire ordeal with a clear conscience, a clean slate, and a sense of satisfaction. Sure, he was disappointed that Isabella hadn't turned out to be the loyal wife he once believed her to be, but he couldn't help but feel proud of how smoothly his plan had played out. He'd outsmarted everyone, kept his dignity intact, and sidestepped the drama like a pro. Leo left with his head held high, his pockets untouched, and his freedom intact. A lesson learned, a marriage ended, and one heck of a story to share over a beer or two.